Hi, my name is Arlette, and this is my family analysis project. So I want to ask, what is family? The definition of what family is has different meanings for all of us. Some define it as just the people who you share blood with, and others see it as anyone who's close to them regardless of genetics. However, sociologists define it as groups of people who are related by genetics, marriage, or choice, and who share material, emotional, and economic resources. In addition, family seen through the perspective of a sociologist is not viewed as a formal organization like a government or church. Instead, it's a social institution. That is because the members of a family are held together by the commonly shared goal of the well-being and mutual support of its members, and they organize people and power based on positions of social status within the family, like a mother or daughter. The concept of family to me is the exact same definition sociologists provide. And with it comes trying to understand the purpose of a family and the issues that arise, in conjunction with attempting to understand how family members are affected by their generation socially, historically, and economically. The way we interact with our family is the result or opposition of generations that came before us, as well as a mirror of our environments. We can reflect their doings onto us. For the analysis, I will be comparing and contrasting the experiences of different generations throughout my family and the family of my mother-in-law. The first person I interviewed was my father, Hugo. The other interviewee is Teresa. My father and Teresa are not far apart in age. However, some of the things they've experienced are different due to where they grew up. Of course, the differences between myself and both of them are tremendously different. My father was born in Guadalajara, Mexico on June 29, 1971. He was born in a city 3 hours away from his hometown. He is one of 10 children, but at one point was one of 11. The oldest and youngest children are about 15 years apart. The others are close in age. He had the traditional family that consists of a heterosexual couple and their biological children. One aspect of his family that was a bit different is that both his mother and father worked. His parents were constantly having to work because of the expenses they had to pay. However, his older siblings were primarily the ones to take care of him. His mother would sometimes leave for several days at a time to work in Guadalajara, go back home for a day or so, then go back for work. Unfortunately, he had to leave school in 8th grade to help provide for his family. They were low income and tried everything they could to survive. This was when his parents decided to apply to get a green card alongside a few of his older siblings in order to get a better life in the United States. His parents were successful, so his mother and 2 oldest brothers traveled to Tijuana, where they crossed the border. A few months later, they were able to get all 10 children green cards and then resided in Vista, California. My father at the time was 13, so his parents enrolled him at Oceanside High School, but soon dropped out after 9th grade to help his parents pay for bills. He never completed high school, and working was all he was able to do. Eventually, he was able to revisit his native country, where he met my mother, brought her here, and they started their own little family. The second person that I interviewed, Teresa, had a difficult time remembering her experiences in her past, but she had a similar story to that of my father. Teresa was born in Oaxaca, Mexico. She is one of 11 children. She had both her mother and father in her life. Her father worked while her mother was a stay-at-home mom. Teresa grew up very Catholic. She is baptized, did her first communion, and confirmation. Her parents would take all 11 children to church, and they'd read the Bible. She remembers having a nice childhood because her parents taught them the importance of family and being close together. That being said, she was close to her siblings and spent most of her days with them. She was only able to complete sixth grade because she had to help her parents take care of her younger siblings. She grew up in a small town, but at the age of 18, she moved to Mexico City to work. She then met a man who later became her husband and decided to move to Guadalajara. Years later, they had 3 children, but in 2007, her husband traveled to Vista, California to find economic success for his family. About a year later, he attempted to bring Teresa and 2 of the children here, but failed after 2 tries. Then, in 2008, he was finally reunited with them. Since Teresa was taught the ways of Catholicism, she also taught her own children and passed on the value of family. As of now, there is good communication between her and her siblings. She talks to a few of them in particular every day, and others not so much because of the lack of physical closeness. Lastly, my story is quite different than both my father and mother-in-law. I was born in Escondido, California. I grew up in Vista for 13 years, moved to Fallbrook for 4, moved to Escondido for 1, and now Oceanside for 2 years so far. I have a mother and father, 1 brother, 2 sisters, and another half biological sister. My brother is 4 years older than me. My sister is 3 years older than me. My second sister is 9 years younger. And my third sister is 19 years younger. I went to school like any other child. I never worried about having food to eat or wondering if we would be homeless every month. That is because my father had a financially stable job for all of my childhood. That was until fairly recently. My mother worked for a year when I was 5, then forced to quit, became a full-time housewife. Then in 2013, she went back to work and has not stopped since. Overall, she has worked off and on. We traveled to Mexico and San Francisco often to visit my mom's family. I had what I would call a normal life. I completed high school with good grades, and I am now in my 3rd year of college, still with good grades. My parents were the primary influencers in my academic success. They are the reason for why I am where I am today. They also raised us to be Catholic. I was baptized and did my first communion. However, at the age of 14, I no longer believed in religion altogether. I am now agnostic and sometimes even atheist. One part of my family that is not traditional is that we are all very emotionally distanced from each other. My parents did not instill the concept of unity and being emotionally available for one another when someone was in need. Our bond has gotten better over time, but it is still not where I would like it to be. The same goes for my parents. They divorced in 2018, so I live with just my dad at the moment. But our connection is also very broken. It is even worse for the bond I have with my mom. I rarely see her and my baby sister, so it is difficult to grow that connection. The idea that mothers would go to work in Mexico was not commonly seen compared to here in the United States. It was still expected of mothers to stay home, to cook, clean, and raise the children. So it would only make sense for my dad's mother to conform to this notion of the stay-at-home wife. But considering the situation, my grandmother had to work. My grandfather was not making enough money to provide for all 13 people. They needed another way to find money, and she was physically capable of doing so. She even continued working once they came to the United States. It was more socially acceptable for women to work here because women's employment had increased gradually from the beginning of the century into the 1950s. During that time, most employers only hired single women. But starting in the 1950s, as women married at younger ages and the growing economy needed more workers, there simply weren't enough single women to go around. Employers opened their doors to married women, and women responded eagerly. My dad saw his mother working when he was younger and understood why she did it. However, he was more changed by society and gender roles outside his family. He expected my mother to stay home at one point and kept her from working because he did not want to stay home. Contrastingly, to my grandmother, Teresa's mother did not work because there was no one else to help her take care of the children. Her father would work and eventually became the only source of income for their family. There were also historical and societal factors that affected this. Like mentioned before, women were not seen working as much as they are here. They had to stay home and work from home. This shaped the way Teresa views responsibilities of a mother and wife. Without noticing it, she's a product of her surroundings in childhood. Notably, she has adapted to the way we see mothers in the household here. She occasionally works, but her primary duty is in her home. She cleans, cooks, and does everything necessary for her house to be in order. She conforms to society's two-way thinking. My experiences are similar to that of my father's and Teresa's, but my outlook on this topic is very different. My mother practically raised my siblings and I. She took us to school, fed, clothed, cleaned, and did everything a typical housewife would do. She only began to work when there were economic pressures from my father, so she needed to work at that point. There were societal elements too, because my father made her a stay-at-home mom. She too was a result of her environment. Although I've witnessed my mother and Teresa undoubtedly conform to society, I believe the opposite. I want to work and make my own financial success without the demands of a man. I understand why they both did what they did, but I will not allow myself to comply to those beliefs. The other huge sociological idea that plays a role in this is gender. Teresa's mother and my mother were expected to be housewives and stay-at-home moms because of gender roles and expectations placed upon them by others. Their husbands were the main ones influencing these decisions. This is because the family, probably more than any other institutional arena, is where sexual identity is turned into gender identity, and where gender expression is learned and practiced. Some feminists have expressed strong criticism of family practice, such as the division of childcare and housework, and how family decisions are made. Another component of all three experiences is childbearing. So both my father and Teresa grew up with many siblings, each with at least 10. Their mothers at the time were not aware of contraceptives and only knew that women were supposed to have children. They had no other understanding of women being anything else. This is due partly to historical and societal factors. They were simply doing what they had known at the time. However, my mom had half of the number of children the other mothers did. She was more educated on how to avoid pregnancy and wished more for herself than to be only a mother. From the 1900s to 2010, the birth rate dropped roughly 60%, from more than 32 births per 1,000 people in the population to 13. My mother was a part of that birth rate drop because she had less children. This affects the way that all three mothers see their families, because some believed having many children is what makes a family, while others don't. Immigration is a considerable piece of how it affects families and how they associate themselves to the past. My grandmother, according to the textbook, is first generation because she is part of the classic immigrant whose fateful decisions bring the family to the United States, usually for employment or a better future. Despite success at work, they may never feel fully integrated into the new society, especially if they do not learn English well. My grandmother loves to recall her past experiences and provide us with stories, lessons, and advice for the future. She is deeply connected to her past and has made it a central part of her children's lives too. They all love to go back to Mexico and do the things they used to love to do. Very similarly, Teresa feels the same way. She loves to talk about her experiences and her journey on the way to this country and how that part of her will never be diminished. That part of her will always stay there, unlike, for example, me. I have heard my dad's story, and as well as my mom's story, and my grandmother's and all of my other relatives, but I was born here, so I can never identify myself as an immigrant. It is my family history, but I still consider myself to be Mexican, even though I have never lived there and it does not qualify as a race. I wanted to end this by answering some questions that we were given, and one is, what elements do you think influence how much a person learns about his or her family history? So I said that I believe some elements that influence how much a person learns about his or her family history is how much their relatives spoke of the past, how close they are with their family members, and of course, the amount of contact. For example, someone who has lost both of their parents as a child and is later adopted by a completely different family will never learn of their family history. This is the main factor that affects whether or not someone learns of their past. Next is what influences the value people place on knowing about their family's past. I think something that influences the value people place on knowing about their family's past is what actually happened in the past. For example, my grandma and my dad love to talk about their past experiences, and I proudly tell people where my family comes from. They are immigrants, and I have no shame in telling people that. But of course, if it's something that's quite horrible, or even if they're just ashamed of who they come from, that can be a reason for why people don't talk about their past. And finally, does a person's age affect how they talk about their predecessors and how? I do think a person's age affects how they talk about the people who came before them, because I think as you get older, you begin to appreciate and value those people. You remember how that person was and what they did, and it makes you grateful you're related to them. And I just want to end off by saying that family consists of individuals with differences, similarities, connections, and stories. My family and Teresa's family are diverse groups of people simply trying to navigate how to live in this world with the help of each other. We may not always agree on how to survive this world, but we can agree that we need one another. Each generation is diverse in its own unique way, and having this opportunity to discover where those differences come from have helped me to better understand them. I also have more of an appreciation for being able to know my family history, because I know we have a limited amount of time on this earth, and I hope to one day pass that history on. Thank you.